Settings correct.
Doc and the Captain are back, and today we have a special guest from HRV4Training. Today we are meeting with Marco, and I want to I know that you guys hear us talk about HRV4Training like fanboys, so we're gonna go to the actual root of it and give Marco the opportunity to talk about HRV and HRV4Training and kind of give the idea of why it's so valuable and how it can pertain to you and your lifestyle and really allow you to take advantage of tracking that HRV, and whether it be managing the stress, managing whatever obstacles come in life, it's a valuable piece and tool that can allow you to be a better individual. So Marco, how are you doing today?
I'm good. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Anytime. And with that, why don't we start by what drew you to really diving into just this HRV lifestyle and then getting connected with HRV4Training?
Well, let's say I have a technical background. In the old days, I studied computer science and engineering. But what then triggered my interest was always, applying these tools and technology to, let's say, better understand the human body and physiology. So I've always worked, with wearable sensors. Like 10 years ago, when, there was basically no wearable sensor you could buy. I was working with these research institutes where we would develop these prototypes for brain activity, for heart activity, and all of that. And at the same time, I would say it was the right timing as well, because you would have the first smartphones, the first Android phone, and then the first iPhone. And all of that, made it just easier for people to do things and to develop tools that everybody could use, which before was not even the case. Right now we take it for granted, but some people had PDAs, and that was like how it worked. So you couldn't really develop things for people to use. And then the Bluetooth standard improved to a point where you could buy a chest strap and link it to a phone, and that was not possible even before the iPhone 4. So step by step, like the technology developed in a way that we could finally measure physiology in a simple way. And my interest over the years developed always in the context of stress eventually. So of physical stress due to exercise, but also stress at work, and how your body responds to stressors, and all of that eventually leads you to HRV, which is the best marker we have of stress, basically the only non-invasive marker that you can measure and gives you a clear picture which represents the activity of the nervous system. And step by step from there, we've developed this camera-based measurement, which made it again a bit more easy for people to use. And then wearing a sensor first thing in the morning, nobody likes that. Chest strap, if you have even to get it a bit wet, and it's cold, and all things that seem like small problems, but then you don't do it. And if you don't do it every day, you don't collect the data, and then there is no point doing this. So with the camera-based measurement, that again, as you know, we validated that to show that is equivalent to other measures. So, gain a bit of trust of the community over the years, slowly built the product to, rely on this measure and help people just quantify stress regardless of where it comes from, as you said in your intro as well.
Well, and I have to say that the camera-based, as you spoke before I moved to your product, you had to put that strap on, you had to lay for a minute, you had to stand up for a minute. In the morning, first thing getting out of the bed, it's like I either need to go to the bathroom or I want to get up and start my day. It's a couple of minute process in that. With HRV4Training, just reaching over, grabbing my phone, opening the app, putting my finger on the camera. 1 minute later, everything I've gotten my reading and I move on. It's a extremely valuable piece. And again, what we don't track, we don't know. And in that process, it just allows us to know how we've recovered from the stress of not just that day, but the whole week. And having that kind of baseline built and that overview of the rolling calendar just kind of sees that, am I doing too much or what's going on? If you've gone through a couple of workouts that maybe haven't been up to your standards, I always jump into my HRV4Training app and take a look at what some of my results have been. And hey, you know what? There's something there. Maybe I need to back off a little bit. So I'm glad to hear just how you guys have moved through the process of technology and stayed on the front end of this, because it's a very valuable tool that I don't think people are still fully aware of and know how it can benefit them. So as far as the autonomic nervous system, what would you say about that? How you guys track that, and what parameters you kind of pull from that autonomic nervous system?
Yeah, so basically the way this works is that what we can quantify precisely is the activity of the parasympathetic nervous system. So that's, the part of the nervous system that normally is in charge of, rest and recovery. And the reason why we can quantify that with these short measurements is that the parasympathetic nervous system basically modulates the heart in, let's say, with a very fast activity, which you then can capture in these beat-to-beat changes in heart rate, which we call heart rate variability, right? Mm-hmm. So as you face a stressor, the autonomic nervous system responds to that by modulating your heart. So basically it changes your heart rhythm based on the stress that you're facing. And then we measure that heart rhythm in response to the stressor as a way to quantify, the overall stress on your body. And again, it doesn't matter where the stressor comes from, your body responds in the same way. That's why, it's very important to measure in a known condition, first thing in the morning. The only reason to measure at that time is that you want to measure when you're not affected by so many other confounding factors. And like really anything affects your autonomic nervous system, because even if you just open your social media or read something that gets you angry for a second, like that's already too much.
Right.
Like you don't want to measure right after doing that, because you don't need to measure. Like that if you are upset, your heart rate increases and maybe you get a bit sweaty, and that's your system responding to the stressor. And of course, in this case, like in many other examples, the stressor is just temporary short stressor that will be gone in a few minutes. And that's why we don't really care much about that, but we really want to quantify the baseline stress, which is a good representation of how you've been doing, as you mentioned, over the days, with response to everything you're doing with your training and with your lifestyle. And that's best done first thing in the morning. As soon as you wake up, ideally you're still lying in bed, you take your measurement. If that doesn't work for you, because some people have, I don't know, small kids running around, it's just impossible to do it in the bedroom. And then you just go to the bathroom, sit there, take a minute and do your measurement. As long as the routine is always the same, it doesn't really matter. It doesn't have to be exactly in a precise protocol, but it should be the same every day for you, so that it's consistent. And that's, I would say, one of the most important bits when you start to get your measurements, so that you can get meaningful data over time.
Repeatability is kind of, especially what Drew and I talk about with our athletes, is anytime that we do a test, we want it to be repeatable. So if you have it repeatable and in the same scenario, you're able to get realistic and light data. So that makes perfect sense. Drew, what questions do you have?
I mean, I think you guys hit everything that I was going to ask. How accurate is this thing? I'm always curious. I mean, down to what portion of a millisecond accuracy does it record to?
Yeah, so when you measure with the camera, it is actually the same as using a chest strap or using an ECG. The exact same value, as a matter of fact, because due to the nature of the PPG signal, which is blood flow from the finger, that's what we measure with the camera, because you light up the skin and then you can see basically blood flowing with each heartbeat, and that's the signal we use to reconstruct the heartbeat. But the thing is that even if the camera is not at super high frequency, the PPG signal, the one that you see also in the app, is a kind of smooth wave. For example, with respect to the ECG, where you have a very sharp R peak corresponding to the heartbeat. And this makes basically the lower frequency camera still good enough for a very accurate measurement, because it's just of a different waveform. And you can capture that with the same accuracy. So, there are things, of course, that need to be accounted for. For example, this is a time critical operation. So when you do it, if you're receiving like 10 WhatsApp messages, well, that's going to be a problem, right? It's going to mess up everything that is happening. So normally on iPhone, there is no issue because still the app has priority. On Android, resources can be deallocated. So there, we have also some other algorithms in the background that inform the user, if like there was some delay, something went wrong, please, measure again. This was not a good measurement. That's unusual. And in general, if something like that happens all the time, like you open your phone and there is always like a million things going on, then the easiest thing to do is just to put it in airplane mode and take your measurements. So, there's just something from a practical point of view that is an important difference to note when you use, something like the camera measurement with respect to a dedicated sensor, which is not affected by any of that. But yeah, once you've done that, or if you're sure that in that minute in the morning your phone is not doing anything crazy, then it's okay. It's the same accuracy.
Awesome. Well, I would have to say, if you're rolling out of bed and you're getting hammered with text messages, you're already stressed.
Yeah, true. Already doing something wrong.
So, and with Drew and I as athletes, we walk them through the process, but for the individual that maybe doesn't have a coach or that doesn't have a scientist breaking some of this information down, one of the things that really attracts me to the application is kind of the education that you guys provide to kind of allow just any individual to understand and break down this product. Can you give us a little bit of detail on some of that information of how you take and try to provide that knowledge to somebody that might not be a scientist or might not have a coach looking at some of these parameters?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think that's one of the most important bits. It's now that we have so many ways to capture the data, is actually to make use of the data in a way that is meaningful to people. And there is also where much of the confusion comes with HRV, because HRV is nothing new. It's like 50, 60 years that we do the same things. Now it's just easier to measure, but at the same time, you can use it for very different applications. You can measure after exercise to see, how long it takes for you to get back to baseline, or you can measure before and after, certain stressor, which could be even just testing food allergies. Like there's like a million applications where you want to measure the autonomic nervous system. And that can, create a bit of confusion around what is our application, which is probably one of the simplest, because it's just about assessing baseline physiological stress, which you do first thing in the morning. And again, once you do that, each individual has, their own physiology in response to what they do and their own baseline values. So the most important thing that the app does is just to learn from you over time. So you measure for a few days, and we start building what we call your normal values. Is just your historical data, so that then when you measure and you have collected enough data, the app is able to compare each day's HRV with your historical data and let you know if there is significantly more stress. There is also something that is not super intuitive sometimes, because HRV is a metric that can vary a lot from consecutive days even. There is much more variability than in other variables that we are used to measure. If you track your body weight or even your resting heart rate, it's going to change very little one day from the other. But if you track your HRV, it can change more. So it's important that the tool you use is able to understand, what's just normal variability that does not mean anything. Your score maybe today is a bit lower than yesterday. Mm-hmm. Do you need to be worried about that? Maybe not, because it's just the regular variation that it's part of your physiology. And that's what the app does for you. Basically, it learns this so that it's going to flag a measurement only if there is significantly more stress. And then you know that you should try to make some adjustments and, just the basic things, and, give priority to recovery, reduce training intensity, all of that, try to sleep better. So the basics of, trying to reduce stress. But again, it's important to determine when is it that you're actually more stressed, or when it's just a variation that it's normal for your physiology. So I would say that's the most important bit that the app tries to do and communicate to the user, which is also a bit different from how others do things. And sometimes, especially in the context of HRV, the older way of thinking was that higher is always better, but that's not really the case for this kind of measures. I think staying within what is your normal values, and values that are the normal for you are values that are good for you, more than trying to achieve particular values that maybe are just not how your physiology works.
Which makes sense. And especially to reiterate to our viewers that this is not a number that you can compare to other individuals, because especially over the course of the time and your normal values, they are for specific to you. When you start comparing them, if I'd compared my numbers to Drew and Drew's numbers to somebody else, those numbers are all going to be significantly different and provide a different picture for that particular individual. Trying to relate something from Drew's calculations to mine is going to be completely useless and a waste of time, because we both have different stresses, we both train different, we both sleep different, among 100 of other different things. So to the viewers, just know that if you're having this conversation at a fireside chat, that it's not a whole, you can't really compare numbers in this particular case. It's not like saying, I have an FTP of this number, or I run a mile in this amount of time. So that's a valuable piece to remind everybody that it's very specific to each individual.
Exactly. Yeah, and then indeed, also the way you respond as well, right? The changes you will see will be based on how novel is the stimulus you face, and what's the volume of the stimulus that you're used to take, what other stressors are present. Everything is really personal. So that's why actually it makes sense to measure, because you can expect different responses from different individuals.
Absolutely. And we're all trying to look at making these physiological adaptations, and some things, just because we're different, might work for one person and might not work for another. And if we're stressing that system out in the wrong way, maybe that workout is not best for you, and we make some slight adjustments. This kind of gives us that outlook of how the body looks at that, and the system kind of bounces back from that, or doesn't bounce back from that workout.
Yeah, exactly.
So you guys are partnered with a lot of extremely knowledgeable exercise physiologists, sports physiologists, and medical professionals. Do you want to talk about just kind of some of where you guys get your information and develop some of that information from, with some of those industry leaders from that standpoint?
Yeah, for sure. I think we've done much of the work we did also around the validation of the camera-based measurement with Daniel Plus, which I'm sure many know as the well, apart from being a great physiologist, he's also a fantastic athlete. I think
Total
he
world
still
record holder. Now, those that
yeah,
don't know.
exactly. There are not many like him. So he's always been a great source of information with his research. Starting from that, right, the published work that anyone can read. He works for so long with elite athletes, and measuring this data every day, and in response to Olympic training cycles and everything. So I think there, we started seeing a lot of useful information, because he would measure daily. And then, again, it's not just the spot check that we used to do when, there wasn't the right technology. You would measure once, and then you go through 3 weeks of training, and then you measure once, and, what can you derive from that, right?
Right.
It's so little. But, now you have a very different picture. You can see the effect of overtraining. You can see physiology being suppressed. So I would say from all of these papers, that in the past decade really pushed the field forward, I would say, in terms of the metrics used, which are the same used in the app, but also the insights due to the longitudinal data. that also helped a lot. And then I think now we have maybe another stage in which, through the apps that we have, even more research is being carried out because it's so much easier and cheaper also for universities to do this. So for example, we did a study with a group out of Canada that used HRV4Training to determine the relationship with the menstrual cycle. And, again, also there was before quite some literature where they would measure maybe once, and then after a few weeks, measure another time. And then, you get maybe a high point in a low week, and then your conclusions are, the other way around. But they measured every day, and then they could see a clear trend with a reduction throughout the cycle. And then, that this is something that happens. It's just physiology. And then, if you're coaching an athlete and you have a certain response, you have that piece of information that you can take into account, and, you don't have to worry about potentially other stressors being present. So, all of that I think is still building because, now more research is being carried out, but I would say the building blocks are there, as the metrics to use and the way you measure every day. So all of that, I think, at this point has been established, and it's good to see also, other products and systems that are out now that use the same metrics. Everything is based on RMSSD, which is, this metric representing of the parasympathetic nervous system. So we use that to compute the metric that we report. Recently, there's the Oura Ring, for example, to measure during the night, which is also reporting the same metrics that we can also, integrate and do the same analytics. So everything is much more consistent in the scientific community and in the products, which, slowly is making things easier also for people to understand and generating a bit less confusion. So I think that's always good.
Well, and when everybody gets on the same page, it allows the community to work together and build that knowledge base and develop that knowledge base as well.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's really key here because, what we want to do is really just to provide a tool for awareness and to start with, as you say, right? When you cannot know how it's going if you don't measure it, and sometimes the data tells you something before you realize it. Working with athletes, I've been doing work this year with the Dutch Triathlon Federation here in the Netherlands, so the elite team of triathletes they have. And, talking to the coaches there that have been using the system in the past few years, often they use it even just as a tool to start a conversation, because you look at the data and you see maybe a trend that is a bit odd or not expected in a certain period. And then, you just talk to the athlete and figure out what is happening. And maybe you learn that something happened and there is some new stressor and, something that you didn't account for or was not part of the training, right? It's just due to some other reasons. So awareness, I would say, step 0, and probably the most important thing here before even you try to start and making changes.
And I will say, and Drew can speak of this too, I think with our athletes, if we see that number tick down, it forces us to become a little bit more involved, and it ends up developing a stronger relationship with our athletes because we're kind of like you talked about, we're digging a little bit deeper, we're asking a little bit more in-depth questions to kind of find what might be off if everything is just normal and maybe there's just stress from work or whatever it might be. But it gives us that opportunity to kind of dissect that individual's life, and it's all because of the statistics and numbers we're getting.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's really about the response. That's when the data is useful, right? Because we already track everything in terms of training, right? And sometimes you increase training load, you have a high intensity block, and you don't expect a negative response. Maybe if the athlete is either used to the stimulus or just responding well to this stimulus, and then it's just the data, it's just confirmation that everything is going well. And that's why it's useful. It's really about the response. It's not just an information linked to load or absolute stress that would put on the system. Is really how the athlete responded to that stimulus, and that's the information that eventually is more useful.
Absolutely, value is king right there. Drew, do you have any other questions that you have for Marco?
One other question. Have you guys looked at the validity of actually performing, HRV before the workout, doing the workout, and performing it afterwards? What would that help anyway, just to determine how intense that exercise was, or that session was?
So that's a great question. Normally, we look only at assessing baseline physiological stress,
Okay.
and still, this is something that you could also potentially think of doing at different times, as you said, maybe before the workout. Some people sometimes say, I don't understand why I have to measure first thing in the morning. I think I should measure just before working out to see what's my state at that moment. But physiology doesn't really work that way. And if you measure before the workout, maybe you just had caffeine and you're just really pumped for the workout, and your HIV is suppressed, but it doesn't mean anything. It's just that you're getting a bit more sympathetic because you're ready to perform. So that's why it's better to do it in the morning. So always the same state, and then you get that information, which is more useful to understand overall stress. And then on the impact of the workout and measuring before and after, I think there is quite some work there. We never went there because I think it's difficult to make it useful from a practical point of view, because it needs to be very well standardized. Like you should do a session, and then the time it passes from finishing the session to doing the measurement should be always the same, because if you wait 2 minutes more, then you're already getting more rested, so to speak, and you cannot just compare to the previous ones. And I think there is something that in lab studies shows up a lot, because they do something on the treadmill or on the bike, and then everybody's there, and then they measure, and then they measure after 5 minutes, and then they see maybe we recover more or less based on the intensity and all of that. But I have found so far this to be a bit less practical for applied scenario. So we never went there. And in general, also my thought here is that everything will affect you in a way that eventually affects your baseline physiology. That's why, for example, the morning score is entirely your physiology. It's not combined with anything. Because if you slept poorly, it's good to know, and then you annotate that in the app, and that's context. But that is not going to be something you want to use to generate the score, because the score already includes how your body responded to sleeping poorly, right? So it's just physiology. So, thinking on those lines, anything you do eventually will affect your baseline physiology. The workout will also affect it. And if you need more rest, it will be reflected there, and you don't need to measure right after. Or at least that's how we see it, and why we recommend always doing these baseline measurements as a way to do something also that is a bit easier and to do consistently. But yeah, definitely another area where there is plenty of research is in trying to quantify recovery that way. But so far I haven't seen anything of great practical use, I would say.
Awesome.
That makes sense. It's very valuable tool. And outside of that, Marco, are there any other things that we haven't touched on today that you feel we would be upset that we didn't bring up?
No, I think there's a very nice overview of why we have these tools and what they can do for you in terms of assessing stress and trying to make small changes. We haven't talked maybe about what kind of changes you would implement, but I think again, step 0 is really always awareness, and then collecting data for even weeks before you make any changes, because you just have to see how your individual case is and how you respond to stress. And then, of course, at that point, you are interested also maybe in making some changes to have things work better for the individual. But yeah, I would say maybe from a research point of view, there is some interesting work there. And it's always linked, just to give you some input on this. It's probably already, but it's always the same. When your body is more stressed, it means it's just not ready to take up high stressor, because our capacity to handle stress is limited. So the basic change in the context of training and performance and training periodization optimization is always to scale down the intensity. So as simple as that, your body is more stressed than normal, you scale down the intensity. It doesn't mean resting, right? Especially if you are athletes that work out every day, you're used to working out every day, so you can just do something easier instead of a hard session. And I would say that's as simple as it is.
Awesome. Awesome. Awesome work. Yeah, I think it's been something that's been in my routine for almost 2 years now. And I think that I have personally seen a heck of a lot of development in that process. And I, I've been in love with your product, like I said, since the time that I put my finger on the camera the first time, just because I got time in my day back and it was just a heck of a lot easier to move forward.
That's great to hear. Thank you so much.
Anytime. And so if anybody wanted to do a little bit more research on what you guys are doing, what's your website? What is the place that they can find the apps? And maybe what systems are you guys working on, from as far as phones? How far back? I'm sure people probably have
Yeah.
twos or whatever, but go for it.
So in terms of information, I would say the website HRV4Training.com, and the blog especially, we try to cover as much as possible. Recently also we started putting together many case studies, so that I think make it much easier for people to understand it. We can talk about the autonomic nervous system and physiology and all of that, and it's important because it's up from there, but the case studies show you a picture of the data and your response to stress, and in a second you understand that was going on, and what could change and what were the important stresses. So I think that's very useful, and there's plenty on the blog. And in terms of phones, all iPhones are supported after the 4, I believe, with the camera-based measurement or Bluetooth sensors. On Android, some phones support also the ANT protocol, for example, the one that is used by Garmin straps. Otherwise, Bluetooth sensors and the camera-based measurement is supported, I would say, maybe 95% of the phones, but it's not possible to know before because, of course, we cannot buy all of them, but the app is able to tell you. So, you can always get the app, try, and if the app says, okay, this phone is not supported, you can either use a sensor or just get a refund, or we always give refunds if you mail us, so just drop us a line instead of a 1-star and then we are happy to help you. And I would say that's pretty much it.
Perfect. And Drew, do you have anything else to add in that process?
Nope.
Well, simple. Well, Marco, again, I want to thank you for coming on, taking the time to share a little bit more wealth to our knowledge base, and really talking about a product that it can change people's life in a very positive way, and just allow them to manage their life and stress a heck of a lot better. So I appreciate the work that you're doing, and I also appreciate you coming on here and discussing and talking about it.
Thank you so much. It was great talking to you, and also to hear your experience about the product. My pleasure.
Well, and you keep it up. We'll have to invite you on here for another time.
Anytime.
Perfect. Well, everybody go out and make that magic. And if you have questions, please don't hesitate to put them into the chat below. And don't forget to subscribe, and go ahead and go to HRV4Training.com and go ahead and get that app. Start tracking, everybody. Have a great one.
Take care.